We're going to look at not all but parts of chapter 4 and 5. As we go through this next long stretch, we're not going to look at every single verse. We're going to take big highlights of the chapters, but for sake of time, because there's 40 plus chapters, we're not going to look at all of them, or we'll be in Job till Christmas time. But let me just kind of remind you where we are. Chapter 1, Job is presented to us as the model follower of God. In fact, God says of Job to Satan, he says, have you looked at my guy Job? He's perfect, upright. He is the example of what it means to be one of my people. And Satan says, well, he only loves you because you've been so good to him. And Satan said, let me take away everything and he'll curse you to your face. So God says, okay, you can do that, but you can't touch him. You can't put your hands on him. And so in just a brief, less than 24 hours, Job lost all his possessions, all his money, all his servants, all his wealth, all his power, all his prestige. And then at the end of the day, all 10 of his children were in a house where a tornado hit and all 10 of his children were killed. One of the most devastating days anybody in history has ever endured. But chapter 1 comes to an end with Job saying, as I talked about Sunday, he says, I came into this world with nothing, I'm going out with nothing. This is that example of being poor in spirit. Job had a lot, Job had a little, made no difference. That's not what it means to be poor in spirit. To be poor in spirit means I understand everything I have comes from God. God gave it to me. If God decides, God can take it away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And that's how chapter 1 ends. Chapter 2, Satan comes back to God, and God says, hey, I told you, that guy is my guy. He will love me no matter what. Satan says, okay, but you still got a hedge around him. Let me put my hands on him, and he'll curse you to your face. God says, okay. And you remember what happens? Job is struck with boils from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. He can get no cover. Imagine having every inch of your body covered with bleeding, oozing boils. He sits down in a pile of warm ashes, takes a piece of broken pottery, rubs it over his body, trying to find what little relief that he can. His wife abandons him, tells him he ought to just curse God and die, that he's a fool, and he's all alone. But he still refuses to charge God foolishly. Then at the end of chapter 2, Job's 3 friends show up. These 3 friends come from 3 different towns, and everybody's heard about what's happened to this guy. They all show up, and when they get there, they're so stunned by his appearance. They're so stunned at what's happened to him, they just sit around the fire, and nobody says a thing for 7 days. For 7 days, they just sit there in shock at what's happened to this man. And then at the end of the 7 days, as we saw last week in chapter 3, Job begins to speak. Now, these next group of chapters, as we talked about, here's what's going to happen. Job's going to talk, as he does in chapter 3. And then starting where we're about to pick up in chapter 4, there's going to be these cycles. One of Job's friends will address him. Then Job will answer back. Then the next friend, and Job will answer back. And then the third friend, and Job will answer back. They're going to go through that 3 times. 3 cycles of speeches. All of this happens in a day's time. It's a lot of chapters, but it all happens in a day. They're just sitting there going back and forth with these conversations. Now, when Job spoke last week, you'll remember, Satan said, he'll curse you to your face. When Job finally spoke, he did curse. But what did he curse? Did he curse God? No. He cursed the day he was born. Remember? He said, I wish I'd never been born. He said, if I'd known that my life was going to become this painful, that I was going to suffer this kind of loss, this kind of hurt, this kind of sorrow, I'd just as soon never been born. And Job goes through this deal where he's just explaining to his 3 friends how broken he is. And by the way, who wouldn't be under similar situations? I mean, to have lost 10 children, plus their wealth, plus their possessions, plus their wife, plus their health. I mean, who wouldn't be feeling a sense of misery at that point? And Job says, I wish I'd just never been born. Now, so we're about to see the first of Job's friends, and the man that we think is the oldest among the 3, he's going to step up and he's going to speak. They're all sitting around this fire. This guy's going to stand up and he's going to address Job. Now, I want you to listen very, very carefully to what this guy says, because he is laying the groundwork for what they're all going to say. Now, and one of the things you're going to see is they all got together before they went to Job and kind of figured it out. So they're presenting a united front. We'll come back to that in a few moments. You'll see it for yourself. But he's going to stand up. Now here's what's going to happen. And we all know, we've all been in verbal confrontations with people, the longer it goes, it starts kind of mild. It starts with a, hey, you need to think about this. But the longer the conversation goes, what usually happens? People get more and more agitated, more and more angry, and it becomes more and more of a forceful thing. And that's exactly what's about to happen. But you will definitely see the groundwork being laid right here in chapter 4 with Job's first friend. Now watch this. Then Eliphaz the Temanite answered and said, now this is the first one. Remember, there's 3 guys. There's Job and 3 guys sitting around a fire. Job has just said, I wish I'd never been born. I can't take this. It's too much. I'm a broken man. His buddy, this is one of his 3 closest friends in the world, stands up, and here's the first thing he said. If we essay to commune with thee, will thou be grieved? Now here's what he's asking. He's saying, Job, we've got some things to say to you, but will you listen and not get mad? Will you listen and not get mad? Now, again, I think most of us can relate this to our own life. Whenever somebody says, I'm going to tell you something and I hope you don't make you mad, what's the one thing you know for sure? It's going to make you mad, right? If somebody has to preface what they're about to say and say, I'm going to tell you something and I hope this don't make you mad, don't you feel your back already getting up a little bit? Because you know, if there's nothing else you know, I'm about to get mad. Because that's just the way human nature is. He says, now, we want to tell you some things. Now notice this we. If we essay to commune or to talk to you, will you get mad? Now, this is just one hint. We're going to see some clearer ones in a moment. These 3 guys, before they went to where Job was, they all got together and figured this thing out. Isn't it always interesting how other people can figure out your problems? Have you ever had people like that in your life? They can't figure out their own problems, but they can figure out yours. Well, that's what these guys are about to do. He says, but who can withhold himself from speaking? In other words, we just got to say it. It may make you mad, but we just got to say it. Again, that's something, whenever I hear somebody say that, when people say, oh, there's something I just got to say, there's nothing we just got to say. What we say is a choice. I gave my class the verse the other Sunday. We were talking about some of this. Ephesians 4:29, where Paul says, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth. In other words, he said, if you got something bad to say, don't say it. He says, unless, the second half of the verse says, unless it's for the edifying, the building up of the person, don't say it. You know what? That verse led to a saying every one of our moms told us. Do you know Ephesians 4:29 is the basis for something your mom told you 100 times when you were growing up? Paul said, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth unless it's for the edifying of the listener. You know how your mom said it? If you ain't got nothing good to say, don't say nothing at all. She's quoting Paul. She's just putting it in a little more familiar wording, than Paul did. But saying the same thing. Well, these guys say, well, we got to say it. We got to tell you. If we say to commune with thee, will thou be grieved? But who can withhold himself from speaking? Behold, thou, now here we go. Now listen to this. Didn't even get past the warm-up, and he's already attacking. Behold, thou hast instructed many, and thou hast strengthened the weak hands. Thy words have upholden him that was fallen, and thou hast strengthened the feeble knees. Do you feel a but coming? When somebody starts saying, now you did this good, and this good, and this good, and this, what do you know is coming? But, let me tell you this. You know it's coming. When they start, this is when you're trying to butter somebody up before you go in for the throat punch. And that's what they're doing. Thy word, you've been so good. You've been so good at encouraging other people. You've been so good at helping other people get through problems they were going through. But, you knew it was coming, didn't you? There it is. But now it has come upon thee, and thou faintest. It touches thee, and thou art troubled. Now, I want you to hear the arrogance in that. They're saying, Job, here's basically what they're saying. You're not practicing what you preached. You told everybody else, God will help you. You told everybody else, you can get through this. You've told everybody else when they went through troubles and trials that they'll survive. Now it's come to you, and you're wishing you had never been born. Now, what's wrong with that statement? Number one, when somebody is in a deep state of mourning, is this really going to be encouraging? I mean, is this really the kind of thing you want to say when you're trying to help somebody? You know, that's like, you know how I've always said there's some people that need to stay away from hospitals in terms of visiting other people because they're not really good at comforting people? It's like if there's somebody in the hospital, you know, and they're kind of a heavy guy and they've had a heart attack, it's the kind of person to walk in and say, well, I'm sorry you're here, but you know, if you'd eat right and exercise, this probably wouldn't happen to you. That may be true, but is that what they need right at that moment? They're just not really good at this whole comforting thing. By the way, Job will point that out a little bit later. But what's even worse, what's even more arrogant is this. They're putting on an equal level things that have happened to other people that Job encouraged and what's happened to Job. I feel very confident in saying that nobody in the history of the world up to that moment and maybe up to this moment has ever endured what Job endured in a 48-hour period. To try and say, oh, well, so-and-so, they were sick for a couple weeks. To try and equate that with losing all of your wealth, all of your power, all of your prestige, the love of your wife, your health, and bearing all 10 children in one day. To try and put those two things equal, that is a horrible thing to try and do. But that's what they're saying. He's saying, now, I just got to tell you this, Job, because we've all worked this out. You're really good at telling other people to be encouraged, but now trouble's come to you and you can't handle it. Do you know one of the hardest things in the world to do? When you're going through a trial, when you're going through something in life, one of the hardest things in the world to do is to try and encourage yourself. What do we all kind of need? What do we all kind of appreciate? It's when somebody else comes alongside us and encourages us. When somebody else puts an arm around our shoulder and says, hey, it's going to be okay. They're telling Job, you ought to be able to encourage yourself. You ought to be able to help yourself through this. Well, there's very few people that can. In fact, when Jesus left this world, you remember what he said? The Holy Spirit's going to come and he'll be the, what was that word he used? Comforter. He will come alongside you and help you. We all need that. We all need that kind of outside comfort. We all need our husband, our spouse, our parents. When we're going through difficult days, we all need somebody to put an arm around us and say, it's going to be okay. You're going to make it through this. That's not what they're doing. They're saying, you know, you were real good at giving out that advice. Why can't you give it to yourself? They're not trying to encourage him. They're saying, you ought to be better at encouraging yourself. Is not this thy fear, thy confidence, thy hope, and the uprightness of thy ways? Remember, I pray thee, and here it comes. Here comes the groundwork for everything they're going to say. Don't miss this. It took 5 verses. He starts talking in what, verse 2 or verse 3? It took 5 verses to get to it. That's how heavy this is on their mind. Remember, I pray thee, whoever perished being what? Innocent. Or where were the righteous cut off? You say, what do you mean this is like the foundation of everything they're going to say? Well, here's what their entire argument, all 3 of them, and you can tell they've all rehearsed together. As we go through this, you'll see it. Their entire argument is that only good things happen to who? Good people. And only bad things happen to bad people. If you love God and serve God and do right and live right, then always God will bless you. But if you sin, if you do something wrong, if you have some hidden thing in your life, God will punish you. And what their argument is that since Job is having this incredible bad things happen to him, he must have done something horrible. And he just needs to admit it. Now, what's wrong with that philosophy? By the way, that's very common today. There's a lot, as you've often heard me say, and most of you know, you can turn on tons of TV evangelists who are saying the exact same thing these guys said all those years ago. If you'll love God, serve God, give to this ministry, God will pour down blessings on you. It's called the prosperity gospel. Here's where it started. There's only one problem with the idea that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. You know what the problem is? That's not true. It's not true. You say, how do you know it's not true? Go back to chapters 1 and 2. What did God say about Job? He is a perfect and an upright man, one that escheweth evil and loveth good. God said, this isn't his mama talking. God said, this guy is the ultimate example of what a follower of God should be. Job wasn't a bad person. Job was a good person who was having bad things happen. But they're not willing to accept that premise. In their mind, it's much easier, and it is, by the way, it's much easier to just assume, well, if something bad's happened to you, then you've done something bad and God's getting you. And even people that aren't religious buy into that. They just take God out of the equation and they substitute karma. And they'll say things like, well, what goes around comes around. In other words, if you do good things will come to you. But if you treat people wrong, that'll eventually come around to you. That's exactly what these guys were saying. And the problem is none of that's true. The Bible is filled with stories of good people who had terrible things happen to them. And by the way, we all know people who are horrible individuals who just seem to skate by with no problems whatsoever. The idea that if you're innocent, nothing bad ever comes your way, that if you live right and do right, then everything's going to go good, that's just not true. But this is going to become the foundation. This is just the first little shot across the bow. They're going to come real strong on this in just a little time. Go a little further with me. Even as I've seen, they that plow iniquity and sow wickedness reap the same. In other words, they're saying, Job, you're reaping what you sowed. Bad things have happened to you, so you've plowed iniquity. You've done something terrible, and now God is punishing you. Now, if you're Job sitting there, what are you thinking? I don't think I did that. As far as I know, I know I'm not a perfect guy, but as far as I know, I've loved God, I've served God, I haven't committed any terrible sins that are, that nobody knows about, but God knew about, and now God's punished me. Job would say, I don't see any of that. But they've made their mind up. This is the narrative they're going with. This is the story they're all going to take. This is the line they're all going to argue. You've done something terrible, and now something terrible is happening to you. And then he describes, this becomes very general right here, by the blast of God they perish, that is, those that sow wickedness. By the blast of God they perish, and by the breath of his nostrils are they consumed. The roaring of the lion, the voice of the fierce lion, and the teeth of the young lions are broken. He's making this argument that everybody that lives wickedly, God gets them. By the way, God does eventually get the wicked, but not always in this life. Some people live their whole life and go to the grave and are never held accountable for the things they've done. What the Bible promises is there will be a day of accountability for everybody, but not necessarily in this life. These guys are assuming some facts that are not in evidence. They're just not. Now, watch this. This is something that drives me crazy. I've had people pull this on me through the years. Listen to what he says. Now a thing was secretly brought to me, and my ear received a little thereof. In thoughts from the visions of the night, when deep sleep falleth on man, fear came upon me and trembling, which made all my bones to shake. Then a spirit passed before my face. The hair of my flesh stood up. It stood still, but I could not discern the form thereof. An image was before mine eyes. There was silence, and I heard a voice saying, shall mortal man be more just than God, and shall a man be more pure than his maker? Now here's what he just said. He just said, by the way, Job, I had a vision about this. Here's what he's saying. God told me. He is bringing some supernatural thing into it. I've been down that road with people before who want to play that trump card of saying, well, God told me. Anytime somebody, did you hear that verse where he said, when the spirit passed by me and the hair on the back of my neck stood up? Well, listen, anytime somebody looks at me and says, God told me, the hair on the back of my neck stands up. But not for the reason they think. Because when somebody tells me, well, God told me, or God revealed to me, they're saying something and they're trying to put it in a context where you can't argue it. What are you going to do? Argue against what God told me? And I say, yeah, I'm going to argue that God told you anything. Because as I've said many, many times here at this church, everything God has to say to us are contained in that book you're holding in your hand that goes from Genesis to Revelation. God's not giving any secret visions out right now and saying, okay, you need to go tell so-and-so God told you this about him and straighten him out. But that's the card they're trying to play here. And I want to tell you, that's a dangerous road when somebody starts going down there. He says, hey, I got this secret thing. See, how are you going to argue with that? You weren't there, you didn't see it, you didn't hear it. The only thing you can say is say, well, you know what, buddy? You're either a liar or you're crazy. And that's probably not going to go over real well. But there's no other argument against this. So he's bringing in this supernatural thing and saying, well, I saw this vision and this is what I learned, and you're trying to put yourself above God, and God is smacking you down to size, and you've clearly done something to offend God, and God is teaching you a lesson, and you need to take your lesson and repent. Look a little further. Behold, he put no trust in his servants and his angels. He charged folly. How much less in them that dwell in houses of clay? That's human beings. That's us. He's talking to Job again. Houses of clay is a human whose foundation is in the dust, which are crushed before the moth. They are destroyed from morning to evening. They perish forever without regarding it. Doth not their excellency which is in them go away? They die even without wisdom. He's coming to the end of this, and I want you to hear it. Behold, happy is the man whom God, what? Correcteth. Now, for God to correct you, that means you're doing what? If your parents, now that's not a word we use much anymore. We don't say, my parents corrected me. When I was a kid, we kind of put it this way, my daddy whipped the tar out of me. We didn't say, oh, he corrected me. But you get the idea, right? If somebody corrects you, it's because you've done something wrong. That's why they're correct and you're wrong. They're correcting your error. And then he makes it clear. Therefore, and remember, he's looking right at Job. Despise not thou the chastening of the Almighty. Now, what did he just say? He just looked right at Job and said, God is punishing you for something you've done. You are being whipped. You are being chastised. You are being corrected by God. And you need to quit resisting it. That's what the word despise there means. Quit resisting it. Admit what you've done. Confess it. God will forgive you. And then we can go on. But you've got to admit you've done something wrong. For he maketh sore and brideth up. No, wait a second. Let me stop there for a second because that goes to chapter 18. That goes to chapter 5. I'm sorry. That brings us to the end of chapter 4. Now, chapter 5 just continues right on. Still the same guy talking. But we're just going to skip down to verse 18 because a lot of what he says here is kind of repetitious. But I want you to come with me to the end of chapter 5 and listen to him as he wraps up his argument. For he maketh sore and bindeth up. He woundeth and his hands make whole. Now again, he's saying, God has whipped you, but if you will accept it and acknowledge what you've done wrong, then God will heal you and you can move forward. This is the part I love. Remember I told you they had gotten together on this? Lo, this argument, what I'm saying, we have searched it, and I love this. So it is. And did you hear what they just said? Here's what he's saying. He's saying, Job, let me just be clear here, buddy. The three of us, before we came to see you, we got together. We talked about all this. We figured it out. This is what it is. This is the answer. This is what's going on. You need to accept it and deal with it. In other words, they're saying, we're right, you're wrong. We have the answer to your problem. We all agree, as if just because there's three of them and they agree, well, that's the end of the argument. We agree, so that's it. I love that. We have searched it. That is, we've all sat around and talked about it, argument. So it is. It's over. It's done. We've settled this. Hear it and know thou it for thy good. I love that. Is such an arrogant statement. Job is sitting there in misery and sorrow and pain and hurt. And the best his three friends have got is to stand up and say, you've done something, you deserve this, God is punishing you, and he's punishing you because of some terrible thing you've done. We've all talked about it, we've all agreed that that's what the answer is. Now you need to hear us, you need to agree with us, you need to repent, you need to confess before God and all of us, because we kind of want to know too. Tell God what you've done, and then maybe God will forgive you, and we can move forward. And here's what you're going to see over the next few weeks. That argument is going to become louder and more angry. But here's what I love about Job. Is Job going to sit there and go, well, you're right, I'm sorry. No, you know what I love about Job? He's going to push back, and he's going to push back hard. Job, even though Job was in a terrible spot physically, emotionally, mentally, remember when they said, can we tell you something and you're not getting mad? You want me to tell you what the answer to that is? No. I'm going to get mad, and I want to tell you what I think. But here's what I want you to keep in mind as we move through this. Because there's little bits of truth in what they're saying. There's little tiny... You remember when Jesus talked about the leaven of the Pharisees? He said there's just enough truth and error mixed together to make it palatable. Well, that's what these guys are doing. That's what all false teachers do. They put just enough truth with error to make it sound like, well, that kind of makes sense. But here's what you got to keep in mind. After we go through these 3 cycles of speeches and they say the same thing over and over and over and over again, God's finally going to show up. And he's going to look at those 3 guys and tell them, sit down, shut up, you don't know what you're talking about. And it's going to be a great moment. But we're not there yet. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this time. Father, I do thank you for this man named Job. Such an example of what we need to be. Because God, even in this state that he found him in, God, he still tried to be true. He still tried to be honest. He still tried to say what was right. And God, I pray that you will help us. Even though we will never face a situation quite like Job did, help us in the difficult moments of life to stay with the truth, stay with what's right, stay with what we need to stay with, be the person we need to be.